Hello. When an individual passes away with an IRA, it can be a very devastating time for the family. Hello, my name is Ladia, and I have worked in retirement services as well as on an estate distribution team for a number of years during my career. And so, what I want to talk to you today about is what happens to an IRA when the account holder passes. I want to thank you for joining me for my first live stream. I welcome your questions. I welcome your comments as we go along. So, the first thing I want to talk about is once we receive the notification, one of the first things that we ask for would be a copy of the death certificate. A very important document for a number of reasons. It allows us, or would allow us, to look at the beneficiary designation that was on file signed by the client indicating who they listed as the beneficiary of the IRA. And so, what I want to start with is the spouse beneficiary, because a lot of times the spouse beneficiary is the one that IRS has given a lot of favorable treatment to in terms of when the IRA is passing on to that individual. So the spouse beneficiary has the option of either treating the IRA as their own, transferring the assets from the decedent's account into their own IRA. They also have the option of moving the assets into an inherited IRA. And we're going to talk about the inherited IRA because an inherited IRA is a penalty exception because distributions that come out of that are due to death, and a death distribution avoids the 10% early withdrawal penalty. So, that being the case, a lot of times, if the surviving spouse is under 59 and a half, one thing to consider is moving those assets into an inherited IRA. Because if those assets are needed for any reason, then that individual can take a distribution and once again avoid the 10% early withdrawal penalty. Of course, it would be taxable, and this time we're talking about a traditional IRA, a little bit different for a Roth IRA, but for the traditional IRA, it is taxable and they avoid the 10% early withdrawal penalty. Now, here is the other thing that I mentioned in a short that I did a little bit earlier today, and that was, oh, hi, thank you for joining me. I appreciate that. And so, one of the questions that I had, or that I mentioned a little bit earlier, was the spouse is the only individual that IRS allows them to roll over a 60-day rollover from their inherited IRA into their own IRA. Now, once they do that, they treat the assets as their own in a regular traditional IRA and can take the distributions out without a penalty. Again, taxable for traditional, but IRS gives them that option to do that. And so those are a couple of the options for the spouse beneficiary and only for the spouse beneficiary in this case. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the third option, which is the option for any beneficiary, and that is to take a lump sum distribution. Taking a lump sum distribution means that you're going to be taxed on that dollar amount all at once. So that's not something that a lot of people would do, but that is an option. So the next thing that I want to talk about is, oh, okay. Hi. Hi there, Barrett. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you find this useful. So, the next beneficiary that I want to talk about is the minor child beneficiary. So, the account holder may have listed their minor child as a beneficiary on their IRA. They have similar options to the spouse beneficiary, and that they can move their assets into an inherited IRA, take the distributions out based on their single life expectancy. It has to go into a custodial inherited IRA because it has to be managed by an adult because we're dealing with a minor. Now, once that minor reaches the age of majority for that particular state, whether it's 21 or whether it's 18, then the assets are turned over to the adult. the adult child at that point. And so once the adult child gets those assets, it goes into an inherited IRA in their name. And once it goes into an inherited IRA in their name, that's when they fall under the 10-year rule, where the account has to be depleted within 10 years from the account holder's passing. And so those are the options for the spouse beneficiary and for the child beneficiary. And the child beneficiary, again, just to repeat, has to be the child of the account holder. So those options would not count for a grandchild, a niece, or nephew, but only for the child of the account holder. So I just wanted to reiterate that. So that's the special treatment for the minor child. Now, for everybody else, sister, brother, cousin, whoever else is named as a beneficiary on an IRA, their option, other than taking a lump sum distribution, is to move their assets or portion of the account into an inherited IRA. And because of the Secure Act, that changed individuals from being able to do what was once called a stretch IRA by adding beneficiaries on the account and to continue to let those assets kind of go down the line for each beneficiary once the original account holder passed. IRS kind of stopped that because IRS wanted to have the taxes on those dollar amounts. So now, anyone other than the spouse, and in a special case that I just mentioned, where it is a minor child beneficiary, anyone else, it goes into an inherited IRA and it has to be depleted within 10 years of the account holder's passing. So those are the options that individuals have. Now, if the trust is a beneficiary, that's a totally different situation. And I certainly want to come back and do another live on that because that gets to be pretty involved. So now we're going to go on to what if the estate is named as a beneficiary? Or what if there are no beneficiaries listed on the IRA? Well, that's when the estate of the decedent is the beneficiary. And so once that happens, we look towards the executor for the estate. And the executor for the estate really has to be court appointed. It's usually done through the will, going through probate. And the court will recognize whoever is listed in that will to take over the estate for the decedent. And so, if there are no beneficiaries on the IRA or if the estate is named as a beneficiary, then the executor will take care of taking over the assets, setting up an estate, inherited IRA for the estate. The funds go into that, and then the executor would take care of distributing those assets to the beneficiaries of the estate. Now, another thing about the estate, if there's no one named on the estate, the executor cannot come in and say this person should be the beneficiary or that person should be the beneficiary. If there's no beneficiary, the will does not override the IRA. It is determined by what the actual account holder listed, who they listed, as the beneficiary. It is a written contract that the client signs usually when they open up the account, or maybe they change the account at some point. But whoever is listed as a beneficiary on that IRA, the will cannot override that. So I wanted to make that point too, because that was one of the questions that I received quite a bit when I took estate calls, is that the executor would naturally think that they could direct the funds in the IRA. And they could if the estate was a beneficiary or if there was nothing listed automatically defaulting to an estate for the IRA. Let's see. Oh, this live is about, thank you for joining me. This live is about what happens to an IRA when an account holder passes. So thank you for asking that, and thank you for joining me as well. So the next thing that I want to talk about in this case is, so what if there's no beneficiary listed, the executor comes on, The executor distributes the assets to the beneficiaries. Well, once the assets are distributed from the estate account to the beneficiaries of the estate, they cannot go in and set up an inherited IRA in their name because they would have had to have been listed on the account in name as a beneficiary on that account. Oh, well, great, great, great. Thanks for joining. I'm so happy you did. Yeah, and this is the kind of content that I have on Your Money Always Matters. It is all coming from my experience in working with several brokerage firms and working with retirement accounts and estate accounts, brokerage accounts, all different type of accounts, and distributing them, and a lot of the retirement issues that go along with those. So I hope that if you find this information useful and helpful, that you will subscribe to my channel and certainly help me grow my channel. Another thing that I wanted to bring up too when it comes to what happens to an IRA when the account holder passes is that once we get that initial notification, any accounts in that individual's name are what we would call restricted, where no one would have access to them, and that would only be in the individual's name only. So any IRAs, any individual brokerage accounts, those would all be restricted until we were able to move forward with verifying beneficiaries, notifying beneficiaries, giving them their options, completing the paperwork, and sending the paperwork back in. So it is definitely a process. And so a lot of times, depending upon when beneficiaries would send their paperwork in, would determine if whether or not or how soon they would have access. Because once the account holder passes and the accounts are restricted, if there's any stocks, bonds, ETFs, anything that was in that account as far as investments, they would still be subject to the market fluctuation. So once the client passes, it's restricted, no longer trading, there's no trading in the account. Because if you think about it, the person that is able to direct any type of trading or distributions out of the account, they passed. And so hopefully that part makes sense. That was always a very difficult call in speaking with beneficiaries, especially when the market was down, when things occurred, because they wanted to be able to move everything to cash. However, they didn't have the authority to do it until the assets were moved into their own inherited IRA, where they could have access to do any trading, which is something that they could do any type of trading within their own inherited IRA. But in terms of the decedent's IRA, once we were notified, even before we received a death certificate, the account was restricted for any trading or any other access. Now, when it came to beneficiaries, if there were multiple beneficiaries on the account, a lot of times siblings may know, um, other people may know who they are or that they were listed on the account. However, when they called in, the only one that we could disclose information to for multiple beneficiaries would be that person that was actually listed on the account. So even though they knew that maybe their sister, their brother, or some other individuals were listed as beneficiaries, that was not anything that could be discussed because, of course, for privacy purposes. And so that could be a difficult call as well. And speaking of it being a difficult call, it is a difficult situation when someone passes. It's easy to make a lot of mistakes in trying to determine how they want to receive the assets, because once the assets are distributed, moved into an inherited IRA, and say that beneficiary takes a lump sum distribution, well, that's it. They don't have the option to roll those assets back into the inherited IRA. So they're pretty much stuck with whatever taxable distribution that they have at that point. And so part of my role in doing the estate distribution was speaking with the beneficiaries, with the trustees, with the executors, and giving them all of their options and also encouraging them to speak with their advisor, tax professional for their specific situation. Now, if I go back to the spouse beneficiary that has those additional options, being under 59 and a half and moving the assets into an inherited IRA, another thing that goes along with that is they can either take the distributions out based on their life expectancy, and that's where a certain amount comes out every year based on a life expectancy number and the value of the account to determine the required minimum distribution that would come out of the account each year. That was an option, or the spouse could delay their distributions and not take any distributions until the decedent reaches the required beginning date. And right now, I believe that's at 73 years old. So if you have a spouse that's under 59 and a half, surviving spouse, I'll say that, say they're 50 years old. That individual in an inherited IRA can really take money out at any time, but they could also delay having to take distributions until the decedent would have turned 73. So that's another consideration. And then also, once the surviving spouse that is 50 at that point turns 59 and a half, then again, they have the option to roll over a 60-day rollover from the inherited IRA into their own IRA and treat it as if it was their own IRA. They can make contributions into that IRA, take distributions out, and pay taxes on it for a traditional. But over 59 and a half, that is a penalty exception, so you don't have the 10% early withdrawal penalty. So I know I've given a lot of information there in a short period of time, but those are a lot of the options that the spouse beneficiary has, as well as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the minor child of the decedent has. Um, okay. Um, Hi. But so, yeah, so those are some of the options there. And then again, for the non spouse beneficiaries, just to reiterate, it would go into an inherited IRA, and they have 10 years from the account holder's passing to fully deplete that inherited IRA. Now, they can also name a beneficiary, which is highly encouraged on any type of IRA, is to name a beneficiary on the IRA. They can name a beneficiary on the IRA. So that's an option as well. Here's the thing with naming a beneficiary on an inherited IRA. So, what if that person passes? What happens with an inherited IRA, if you inherit an inherited IRA, you have to complete that 10-year schedule to have all of the assets out. So, in essence, it does not reset that 10-year clock once you receive the assets. You have to finish out whatever. So, if they had an inherited IRA, and they were taking distributions out and they were in their fifth year. And if that individual passed and you inherited the inherited IRA, that meant that you had 5 years remaining to have the assets out of the account. So I hope that part makes sense. It gets a little uh, a little stirred up in there when explaining these type of IRAs. When you inherit an inherited IRA, it does not reset the clock. You continue on that schedule and you deplete that account with the remaining years that are left. So let me know if I have any questions out there or any comments about what I'm talking about. This is some things that I have found during my time as working in the estates team. A lot of different questions, a lot of different situations, and each person's situation is totally different, which is why I would always encourage them to speak with a tax advisor or their advisor to determine what would be the best thing for them to do. And then based on that, that is the paperwork that we would receive, and then we would process the account. That's what I have for you today. I just wanted to go on here. Um, I just wanted to come on real quick and just give you some information about that. I do have a lot of information on my channel about retirement accounts, distributions, and things like that. And so I hope that, again, if you found this useful, that you will subscribe to my channel and help me grow my channel. And so, with that, I am going to close out and let you know that with uh, everything that is going on, the one thing that I think is the big takeaway from this is to make sure that your beneficiaries on your IRAs are current, that they are the individuals that you want on the account to receive the funds when you pass, and not just on your IRAs, but also on your bank accounts, your payable upon death. Make sure that you have the individuals on there and that everything is updated so that there are no surprises for your family members when you are gone. I'll leave you with this real quick story, a call that I took from an executor where the client passed and we verified who the beneficiary was and the assets went to that person. Well, the executor called in and stated that the account holder was deceased and that that person who was the ex-spouse was not entitled to those assets. Well, the sad part to that was, again, the will could not override what was on the beneficiary form. And unfortunately, even though the client divorced, he had not updated his form, beneficiary form. And so, therefore, when we verified who was listed as a beneficiary on the account, it was the ex-spouse, and we paid out to the ex-spouse. And so we didn't overturn that because, again, we were following the written, signed, and dated instructions of what was on the client's account at their passing. So it's very important to just take a moment, look over your beneficiaries, make sure that you have the correct beneficiaries on there. And I just want to thank you for watching and thank you for joining me. And I'll see you in the next video.